Jepson felt like home, and so that's why I chose Jepson. It felt right from the very beginning. You kind of make your own path, and you check off your boxes where you want to check off your boxes.
I had Dr. Hoy and also Professor Williamson as my first professors here at Jepson, and they were both just radiant, both inside and outside the classroom, and it just brought this feeling of just community and family that I miss from home. So coming here, it felt like it was home for me.
The students and the curiosity, the empathy, the passion, and the intelligence that they show in our classes has really driven me, and it's also given me a place to explore a lot of the other disciplines that I didn't choose to major in.
Jepson just gave me all the keys from education to communications and altruism, and I just really fell in love with it, and it just became my home, and I was able to develop really great relationships and friendships, including my roommate and best friend, Nina. Yes!
The uniqueness of being a part of this community in which you're able to kind of look at a topic that's so interesting and so in-depth of something like leadership is really a privilege. And on top of that, there is a really strong feel of community and family within the Jepson School, and has made me a part of the Jepson community for life.
To be able to study with experts in so many different fields just was really exciting. It was something that I was really interested in, and I couldn't be happier.
I realized that Jepson teaches you how to look at a variety of different disciplines, different problems in the world, and ways that we can fix it, and it's that collaborative community that allows us to join together and really try to solve those different issues.
I chose Jepson because it allowed me, as someone who also majors in biology, to have a new perspective on what science can offer, not only in an ethics sense, but kind of also philosophical and different systems of power and how these have contributed to the issues that I, as a researcher, am hoping to solve in the future.
I chose Jepson just because as a journalism major, I really wanted an interdisciplinary approach to my studies, so I wanted to be able to cover a variety of subjects when I'm writing articles at my future job.
I chose Jepson because I knew that I wanted to be serving my community and working to make the world a better place after graduation. And after my first 102 class, I knew that Jepson was a place I could do that.
And one of my favorite things about Jepson is how we study followership, not just leadership, because even though it's called leadership studies, followers are really fundamental to what leaders can do.
So my leadership ethics class with Dr. Kotzia definitely was one of my most challenging classes, but also one of the most rewarding, because it challenged me to sort of look at what I see as fact. Things that I thought were just true my entire life were now up for debate based on, your values, where you're from, and it was very, very interesting to be able to question my own beliefs throughout that class.
I would say group dynamics with Dr. Don Forsyth definitely challenged me to think in new and different ways. I've learned about the different groups that I'm a part of unknowingly and knowingly, but I also learned the necessary behavioral tactics and everyday tactics in order to be successful in these environments.
Justice and Civil Society with Dr. Coker, because we took what we were learning in the classroom and we applied it to engaging with the local Richmond community. I volunteered with Youth Life, and it's an after-school program with underprivileged children, and I worked with 7-year-olds.
My elective with Dr. Ruscio, the Democratic Prospect, challenged me to think about how we as citizens in democracy can hold political leaders accountable, both when they meet expectations or when they fail to act in the best interest of the public.
I took a Jepson class called Leadership in International Context, in which I got to play a world leader, and I had to make some decisions that everybody was not satisfied with. You just have to be confident in yourself and know that you're doing the right thing.
I would say that Dr. Price's leadership ethics class challenged me to think in new and different ways, particularly the solution paper at the end of the year, where I was challenged to solve the moral dilemma of dirty hands.
My Justice and Civil Society class, the community engagement component, where I got to volunteer with Youth Life organization, where I got to mentor and tutor children in the Richmond area.
Critical thinking challenged me the most out of all my entire academic career. I was really forced to engage with what people were saying and think about how they develop their arguments and how I can kind of help improve my own arguments and what I'm saying in a clear and concise manner. And really it framed the rest of my journey both in Jepson and outside of Jepson.
I'd have to say theories and models, just because it really opened my eyes to how there's no one theory for leadership, and it really just depends on the situation.
My group dynamics class with Dr. Forsyth, it really played into my psychology major as well, and really incited my passion of working with people. After graduation, I am actually going to work in integrated talent management in DC.
Critical thinking with Dr. Flanagan helped me hone my debate skills, strengthen my arguments, and become more confident as a student.
Justice and Civil Society, the service component of that class where we spend time volunteering at community centers and things like that. I really understood that the lessons I'm learning in the classroom, they can be applied outside to, service and post-grad opportunities.
For me, I'm a visual and experiential learner, and so being able to kind of go out and learn in the community was a really big part of that, especially going on like a police ride-along in the city of Richmond.
In the summer of 2019, I was lucky enough to go to Jepson at Cambridge and take 2 law classes with my Jepson peers and University of Richmond law students, and it was so cool to study leadership from an international perspective. We were there during Brexit, right after Theresa May had resigned and when Boris Johnson won the Conservative Party's leadership election, and to be able to talk about that in class was an amazing experience.
My sophomore year, I took the Justice and Civil Society class, which allowed us to go out into an elementary school in our local community and volunteer and help teach kids from the ages of 8 to 12 years old. So I would say that that was probably the most impactful class I've taken so far.
Both through Screen and Stage and my justice class, I was able to volunteer with different schools and after-school programs, which also allowed me to find my passion of education, thus pick up my minor and find out what I wanted to do after school.
I actually had the opportunity to serve as a delegate at the United States Naval Academy Conference, and we were able to compare leadership on a civilian and military level and what ethical challenges they deal with.
For my Justice and Civil Society course, I volunteered at Second Baptist Church teaching English as a second language course to adults in the Richmond area. Most of them were immigrants from all over the world, and so it was a really meaningful time to make a lot of connections with people who I otherwise wouldn't have met.
We got to go visit the Gettysburg battlefield, getting to experience that on the ground and getting to go with someone like General Mountcastle, who was incredibly knowledgeable about the events, and having him as a tour guide, it really added a ton of depth to that experience and gave me a completely new understanding of what it might have been like to be a participant in that battle.
By getting to participate in the service requirement for my justice class, I was able to see how racial injustice and poverty impact members of our own community here in Richmond.
I was able to volunteer at Gilpin Court's community center where I spent a lot of time with children. A kind of real life experience that supplemented how I was learning about the educational inequities in Richmond's public school system as well as the nation's public school system.
And I volunteered downtown at the Mayor's Youth Council. It was an after-school program for kids in the Richmond public school system who wanted to voice their issues with their community and potentially solve them. And it taught me a lot about the community of Richmond, and I was able to hear these problems and these issues from the students themselves, and that was really enlightening for me.
Through our justice class, I was able to go to Bon Air Juvenile Correctional Facility and able to cultivate some type of understanding and learning through communication with the residents there. Giving us the chance to be able to go out into the community and learn from these kids was one of the most beneficial things and experiences that Jepson could have given to me.
For my Jepson internship, I worked with the African Community Development Council. I used the critical thinking skills that Jepson provided when I was writing grants and helping navigate virtual events through COVID.
So I completed my Jepson internship with Cabby Consulting, which is a small process consulting startup based out of New York City. And as really an integral part of a small team, it was really important for me to use different leadership principles in order to make an impact on the small company and have a role with my small teams.
I completed my internship at a small real estate startup called Rent Ready. This team, I was obviously the youngest member of the team, so I really tried to be an active listener.
So we both had the opportunity to work for startups, which involved teams of less than 15 members.
And my favorite thing about that was really being able to do meaningful work. Because I wasn't caught up in a big organization, I was able to actually complete meaningful tasks.
I interned at the national headquarters for the Anti-Defamation League, now known as the ADL, in New York City, specifically on the civil rights team as a technology policy intern. And what I really took to that internship from my Jepson education is learning how to read situations and knowing when to be a little bit more of a supportive coworker and teammate and when to back off and really take things in my own direction and make it what I thought the project could be.
I completed my Jepson internship with Frontline PBS, a news and investigation series, and Jepson's interdisciplinary curriculum, as well as its emphasis on ethics and critical thinking, prepared me well to work on a wide variety of topics and to pay attention to details.
I completed my internship with a company called Applied Insight. They're a cloud infrastructure provider, and at the end of the internship, we all had to do a presentation for the entire company. I thought back to my theories and models class, and I remembered storytelling was an important way to connect with people. So I made sure that my presentation had a story in it. And it was actually so good of a presentation, my boss told me, one of the best presentations, that they offered me a job 2 weeks later.
I worked at Virginia Supportive Housing, which is a Richmond nonprofit working to provide housing for people experiencing homelessness. Throughout the internship, I found myself thinking about interpersonal dynamics and the relationships between people, but as well as larger systems of injustice and oppression.
This past summer, I worked as a strategic communications intern with Opportunity Finance Network, which is a nonprofit financial services organization that seeks to give back to underrepresented communities and small businesses. And I felt like I used a lot of different principles I learned from my justice and civil society class through that experience.
Completed my Jepson internship at Avascent this past summer. It's an aerospace and defense consulting firm, and I think I used Professor Price's ethics class the most. I was really making sure I was influencing people in an ethical way.
I interned this past summer at UCB, a biotechnology and pharmaceutical company based out of Belgium. I interned with the public policy team, and we analyzed federal regulation and legislation. I used my Jepson education to understand how leaders came to the decisions they made to govern effectively for the greatest number of people.
I did my Jepson internship with a New York and Beijing-based nonprofit called Redefine China. Thanks to the knowledge and awareness I attained from my leadership studies major around intersectionality and inclusivity, I was able to provide our members with not only gender-related resources, but a well-rounded support system concerning our other identities and vulnerabilities as well.
I completed my internship at Voices of September 11th, which is a nonprofit organization based in New Canaan, Connecticut that essentially provides support services to the family members and victims of 9/11.
For my summer internship, I worked at an organization called Capital Area Immigrant Rights Coalition, where I was a social services intern, and I connected resources to unaccompanied immigrant minors.
I interned at Assurus, which is an estate planning firm in downtown Richmond, so it was so exciting to be able to help people plan for the future through uncertain times by using the Jepson principles of learning and listening to our clients to help lead them in the right direction.
Well, right now I'm working on my Jepson honors thesis with Dr. Coetzee, getting to dive into the criminal justice system, which I'm really interested in, as well as moral responsibility and the philosophy of legal culpability.
This past year, I've been doing an honors thesis in Jepson. I'm researching if essentially leaders mattered in the time of COVID. And so I'm looking at that from a few different angles. I'm incorporating economic analyses, cultural analyses, essentially to get at this root question, which combines all of my different interests.
I do research in the social psychological sciences with Dr. Hoyt. So we're looking at how you view a certain trait. So the three we are investigating is mental health, obesity, and addiction, and how your mindset affects blame and prejudice.
I am looking at the conceptual framings of diversity and how those framings have an impact on a student's sense of belonging. To provide higher education stakeholders, students, administrators, faculty, staff, provide all of these higher education stakeholders with information about how to truly promote campus environments that are communities of care that also serve underrepresented students.
I'm doing a Jepson honors thesis with Dr. Hayter, and I'm studying student activism on college campuses, especially now compared to the 1960s, and what sort of social, political, and economic factors impact student motivation to protest and organize.
I've been working on the moral foundations of freedom of expression with Dr. Jessica Flanagan. We've been looking at open inquiry and free speech, especially as it relates to a democratic society and how we can go about promoting it.
My current one focuses on how air quality changes in response to COVID-19 and its policies, and how social vulnerability contributes to the spatial disparity of air pollution exposure in the Richmond community.
Throughout this year, I've been doing interdisciplinary research that combines my two majors of leadership studies and religious studies, and I'm looking at the influence of a specific Christian group on important thinkers in England and America, like John Locke and Thomas Jefferson, and seeing how this group of Christianity influenced their ideas about separation of church and state.
I've been working with Dr. Hoyt for the past year on my senior honors thesis, where I've been studying the effects of mindsets on mental illness, specifically examining the relationship between blame and the public's belief about how changeable specific mental illnesses are.
The research I've recently been working on is combining my leadership studies major with my English literature studies major and studying witchcraft through different plays such as Shakespeare's Macbeth and Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus to look at the different leadership skills of King James and Queen Elizabeth.
This semester I'm conducting a senior honors thesis with Dr. Harwell. We are investigating the impact of incentives and role modeling nudges on gym attendance in undergraduate students.
I'm doing a philosophy thesis with Dr. Coetzee, specifically on the role of moral experts and the role that they play in our individual decision making and how that affects the moral goodness of an act if it's dictated by a moral expert.
After graduation, I'll be moving to Nashville, Tennessee for a 2-year program with Cigna called the Managed Care Rotational Program. And so I'll be doing things like provider consulting, business strategy, all under Medicare Advantage.
So my Jepson internship this summer turned into what will be my post-grad plans. I'm moving to Washington, D.C. to work as a federal audit associate with KPMG.
So after college, I plan to move to New York and become a prime derivative services analyst at Barclays. Hopefully get to live with my twin sister, who will also be in the city.
After I graduate, I plan on attending Columbia School of Social Work to achieve my master's in social work. And I plan on working with kids, particularly in mental health settings in New York City.
I was recently offered a position on A-Bar-A Ranch, which is a guest ranch out in Wyoming. So that would just be for the summer. And then after that, I have plans to work in the nonprofit sector out in San Diego, California.
So last summer I had an internship with NBC Universal at the Olympics in Tokyo, which unfortunately got postponed until this summer. So I will be resuming my internship as a hospitality intern for them in Tokyo.
I'm going to go to graduate school, still not 100% sure where, but I'll be studying medical anthropology in a PhD program, so hopefully to do field work on chronic illness in the Dominican Republic.
I plan to attend a PhD program in philosophy and become a professor.
This summer I'm going to be studying for the LSAT and then hopefully taking that in August. And then come September I'll be moving up to Washington, D.C., where I'll be working at Avison, which is a defense and government consulting firm, which is also where I interned last summer.
I completed my Jepson internship this past summer with Dominion Energy, and I'll be returning full-time as an associate financial analyst.
Next year, I'm going to the University of Pennsylvania to get my Master of Science in Social Policy. And so through that, I'm just really excited to continue to learn about social policy, and then hopefully after I graduate, continue to advocate and work towards issues of housing and education that I've become so passionate about.